Hey guys, glad you're back. Glad you're watching this week's video. Um, Hope you enjoyed last week's talking about Samuel, and this week we're going to be talking about David. See, he has two chapters in our book that we're reading, the story. This first chapter is about young David. The next chapter is about David as a king, because he does eventually become king, but before he became king, he was a child, and when he was a child, he was nobody special, and that's what I want to talk about today. So I hope one thing that you've noticed throughout the story so far is that when God chooses somebody to do his work, he doesn't always make the obvious choice. See, through these last 10 chapters, we've seen a lot of stories, we've met a lot of characters, we've just read a bunch of stuff. But one thing that I'm always struck by is who God chooses to do his work. So far, we've encountered people like Abraham and Jacob and Moses and Ruth, just to name a few, but they're people who just didn't make sense as God's choices. Abraham and Ruth seemed just randomly chosen out of the blue. Ruth was a foreign woman who just kind of married into Israel, and Abraham was more than just foreign. Israel didn't even exist yet. And we see in Genesis chapter 12 that God just kind of plucks him from his home, from his family, and sends him out and says, just go where I tell you to go. Moses was not equipped to be a leader. He couldn't even speak in public, he said. And Jacob wasn't even born when he was chosen. And after he was born, we see his life. He turned out to be kind of a dirty dealing guy. He was pretty underhanded in how he dealt with things. But nonetheless, God used all these people. God chose all of these people. And like I said, that's what we're going to talk about today, is God choosing someone. So like I said before, this chapter is all about David. And I want to talk about my favorite story from David's life. And it's when David is chosen and anointed to be king. The previous king, Saul, wasn't chosen by God. He was chosen by the people. But David will go on to be arguably the best king that Israel ever had in the Old Testament, because he was chosen by God. And that makes a difference. But just like all those other people I talked about before, there was really nothing special about David. He was just a shepherd. He was the youngest son, hung out in the fields and watched the sheep. He was nobody, honestly. But here, we get to read about Samuel's first meeting with David. He meets with David and his family, and we get to see Samuel's reaction, and I love this passage. It's a little long, but just bear with me. It's 1 Samuel 16, 6 through 13. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. And Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen these. Then Samuel said to Jesse, are all your sons here? And he said, there remains yet the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and get him, for we will not sit down till he comes here. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. You see, Samuel saw what everyone else saw. Whenever, he looked at David, he just saw a shepherd. He was so busy looking with his eyes, just at the physical, that he wasn't ready to leave room for God to work. But each time someone passed in front of Samuel, God let him know. He said, this person isn't right. This isn't the right one. Until David. David was the youngest of his brothers. That made him the least. Birth order really mattered when you're looking at inheritance in these cases. David, as the youngest, he got nothing. But he was chosen by God to be king. So my question is, why would God choose David? So we're left with the question of why. Why, out of all the people that he could have chosen, out of all the people who were already, could have been a great king, why did David, just a shepherd, the youngest son, why did he get picked? And we get to see that answer in the beginning of the passage that we read. After Samuel looked at the oldest son, the one that he was sure was going to be the king, because that's how it works. He's the oldest. But what God says to him there in 1 Samuel 16:7, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. I love that. I take a lot of comfort in that. That when God chooses someone, it's for his own standards. It doesn't make sense to us. It doesn't have to. The people that I talked about earlier, Abraham. Abraham was nobody. He was just some guy living with his family, and he became the father of Israel. Jacob was a crook. He stole from his brother, stole the inheritance and the birthright, but he carried on his faith and became a great man and became the father of the 12 sons who would be the 12 tribes of Israel. And he blessed the 12 tribes of Israel through them. Moses was a murderer. Moses was a murderer with no skills to lead with. But somehow he was able to lead his people out of oppression and into the fold of God. And Ruth, talked about Ruth earlier, just 2 weeks ago. Ruth was a foreign woman. She wasn't from Israel. She wasn't one of God's chosen people, according to Israel. But she became the great-grandmother of the very shepherd king that we're talking about now. Because the great news is that God doesn't see what the world sees. God doesn't see what everyone else sees. He doesn't see what you look like. He doesn't see what you're wearing. God doesn't care what your life looks like right now, because none of us are going to have it together. But the fact is, God sees your heart. God knows who you are, and He knows who you will be. He knows what you will be. And that's who He's going to use. He's going to use you now. He's going to choose you now because of the person that you will be, 5, 10, 20, 50 years down the road. It doesn't matter. Because when God chooses someone, He knows exactly where they're going. So don't let the world label you. You may not even know who you are. Don't let the world tell you who you're going to be. Don't let this world tell you what you're going to be. Because the only label that matters is the label that God has given you. The label that says where you're going to be and how He's going to use you there. Well, guys, that's it. Getting ready for a Wanata, so it was a short video this week. But I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you guys have an awesome week. And I'll see you next Friday.